All right, so today we're going to be diving into something super interesting. Orchids.
Orchids.
Yeah, you know those like really pretty ones, the ones everyone loves?
hmm
Those intricate blooms that seem to last forever. Turns out there's like a secret code to how you actually feed them.
Yeah.
Not just as easy as grabbing, any old plant food. So we are going on a deep dive today
Mhm.
into the science.
The science.
Yeah, and the surprising tricks to like really keep your orchids thriving,
Absolutely.
Really happy orchids.
It's funny because we treat them like any other houseplant, right?
Right.
But think about it, like they evolved in places like rainforests.
Oh, okay.
Where the nutrients aren't just delivered in like one big burst.
Yeah.
It's like a slow and steady kind of trickle over time.
So our usual like dump a bunch of fertilizer and hope for the best,
Yeah.
that's totally off base then.
Exactly. Imagine trying to like water your orchids with a fire hose.
Oh, yikes.
Not a pretty picture. So today we're going to, decode what they really want, what kind of nutrients they're craving, and how to actually give them that.
I'm ready to be an orchid whisperer. Let's get into it. So our deep dive is based on a bunch of things, actually. We've got some scientific studies in there,
Nice.
product reviews, and even tips from expert growers. So
The trifecta.
yeah, it's like the whole shebang. And honestly, some of the findings really surprised me.
Yeah.
Like for the fact that orchids are like super picky about where their nitrogen comes
Oh,
from,
but yeah.
that was like a light bulb moment for me.
Big time.
So before we get into like all the fertilizer details, let's just do like Orchid Nutrition 101.
Okay, so think of it like a recipe
Okay.
for orchid success, right? So first up, you've got your primary ingredients.
Right.
Nitrogen, that's for all the leafy growth.
Okay.
Phosphorus, that's going to fuel those blooms and those roots.
Mm-hmm.
And then potassium, that's for like the overall health of the plant. Those are like your heavy hitters.
Okay, that sounds pretty standard like most plants, right?
Yeah.
What else is in this like special orchid recipe though?
Okay, so then we've got our supporting cast, right?
Okay.
The secondary nutrients like calcium and magnesium, super important.
Right.
These are going to, build strong cell walls, and they keep those leaves nice and green. And then finally, just a pinch, like we're really baking here,
Yeah.
a pinch of those trace elements, like micronutrients. That rounds out the whole blend. Perfect for, optimal orchid health.
All right. So we know what they need,
Yeah.
but you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
That they prefer kind of a slow and steady nutrient supply. How do we actually translate that into how we feed them?
That's where it gets interesting. So one of the biggest misconceptions that you got to hit them with this like big dose of fertilizer all at once.
Okay.
But remember, they evolved to just slowly absorb nutrients over time.
Mm.
So what you want to do is frequent diluted feedings. That's the key.
On it. Frequent. I'm used to like doing it once a month maybe for my other plants.
Oh, yeah. With orchids, it's much more of a weekly kind of approach.
Weekly.
Yeah, we'll dive into that more later. But the idea is to really mimic how they get those nutrients, that slow trickle in their natural environment.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the difference here. So how do we choose the right kind of fertilizer to actually deliver all that good stuff effectively?
Great question. So you're going to see different categories on those fertilizer labels.
Okay.
Things like balanced, bloom boosting, and low nitrogen. And it's really important to understand the difference between those.
Okay, let's break it down. What's the deal with balanced fertilizers?
Okay, so balanced, think of something like the classic 20-20-20 blend.
2020.
It's giving equal parts of those three main nutrients we talked about, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium.
Gotcha.
It's your all-purpose option, especially good if you've got orchids in bark, because bark tends to be less rich in nutrients. So it's like a solid base for overall health.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I'm not sure where to start, balanced is like a good, safe bet.
Yeah.
But what about when I want to really encourage those blooms? When I want those really spectacular flowers, that's when I'd reach for a bloom booster, right?
Exactly. So bloom boosters are going to have a higher phosphorus content,
Right.
like a 10-30-20 or an 11-35-15 ratio.
Yeah.
It's kind of like giving your orchids a little nudge towards flowering.
It's like a targeted nutrient boost. All right, so when would you recommend using them? Is there any downside to, going overboard with it?
Yeah. So you'll want to use those primarily during the flowering and flowering stages.
Yeah.
Think of it like, a temporary boost just to get those buds going. But don't go too crazy. Too much phosphorus can actually hinder the overall growth,
Yeah.
and it can make them, more susceptible to diseases and stuff.
Okay, so it's like a strategic tool,
Yes.
not like an everyday snack.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So what about low nitrogen formulas? When do those come into play?
So low nitrogen is excellent for, like, more mature orchids, the ones that have already established some good growth.
Yeah.
It helps prevent them from putting all their energy into leaves,
Right.
at the expense of those flowers. So think of it like helping them focus
Oh, okay. Interesting.
on the blooms rather than just getting all leafy and stuff.
It's like directing the plant's energy where we want it to go.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got balanced bloom boosters, low nitrogen. Anything else we should be looking for when we're picking out orchid food?
Absolutely. Remember that surprising fact about orchids being picky about their nitrogen?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, it's more than just a fun fact. It's really important to their health.
Okay, can you remind me why that's such a big deal?
Yeah, so it comes down to how they actually absorb nutrients through their roots.
Okay.
And a lot of orchids, especially the ones we have in pots, they struggle to process urea,
Urea, yeah.
which is a super common form of nitrogen in a lot of fertilizers.
Oh.
They much prefer nitrates and ammonium, which are just way easier for them to absorb.
So it's not just like a fancy option. Choosing a urea-free fertilizer is actually really important.
Huge, yeah.
I'm learning so much. I feel like we're really starting to crack this orchid code.
Totally. And once you understand those basics, you can start to, actually apply it to your own orchids.
Okay, so now that we've got like a good grasp on those fertilizer types and the whole nitrogen thing, let's dive into the actual, doing it. What are the golden rules for actually feeding orchids?
The first rule, and I can't stress this enough, is dilution is key.
Dilution.
Like, seriously.
Okay.
Orchids are incredibly sensitive to fertilizer salts, which can build up in the potting mix, and that can actually damage those delicate roots. So you want to always dilute your fertilizer to at least half strength or even quarter strength.
Okay, so when it comes to orchid food, less is more.
Less is more, for sure.
Okay, but how do we know, exactly how much to dilute? Are there, specific guidelines or anything?
Yeah. A good rule of thumb is to aim for around 25 to 50 parts per million.
Parts per million.
ppm, yeah.
Okay.
Of nitrogen in that final solution. Now, I know ppm might sound intimidating, but think of it this way. It's like adding a tiny drop of food coloring to an entire swimming pool.
Oh, well,
It's a really, really small concentration.
that makes sense. Oh, so dilute.
Dilute.
What's the next golden rule we got to master?
Don't forget the dynamic duo, calcium and magnesium.
Oh, yeah.
They're the unsung heroes, often overlooked,
Yeah.
but they play such a critical role in orchid health. So remember, calcium is essential for those strong cell walls,
Right.
and magnesium is what keeps those leaves nice and lush and green.
So should we be, looking for specific fertilizers that have those in it?
Yeah, you can find fertilizers that are labeled as CalMag formulations.
CalMag, okay.
Which is a good option. But even if it doesn't explicitly list them, just make sure it contains at least a trace amount of both.
Okay, got it. Dilute, and don't forget calcium and magnesium. What else?
Okay, so remember that weekly thing we talked about?
Yeah, weekly.
That's the third golden rule. So apply a diluted solution every week rather than a big dose less frequently. And that's going to really mimic how they get nutrients in their natural environment.
It's like giving them a little sip every week.
Yes. Little
Instead of, a whole feast all at once.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so are there any other things that, might change what fertilizer we choose?
Absolutely. So the type of potting mix you use actually makes a big difference in how those nutrients are retained and released.
That's right. We've got to think about the whole
The
environment,
whole thing.
not just the fertilizer itself.
Yeah.
So if I'm using bark or moss or something, how does that change my approach?
So bark-based mixes, they tend to break down over time.
Okay.
And they actually kind of eat up nitrogen as they do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you might need to use a slightly higher nitrogen fertilizer to kind of make up for that loss. On the other hand, sphagnum moss and those inorganic mixes, they hold on to nutrients better.
Okay.
So you might actually do better with a balanced or even a low nitrogen formula there.
It's like they each have their own personality
They do.
when it comes to nutrients.
Exactly. And you got to find the fertilizer that matches.
Okay. We have laid some serious groundwork here. We've busted some myths, talked about all the types, and even, got those golden rules down.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go too crazy and start mixing up, orchid cocktails, What about specific products? Are there any that you recommend based on all the research we've done?
Oh, yeah. There are a few that consistently just deliver great results.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with those top picks.
All right, first up, we've got Jack's Classic Orchid Fertilizer. It's a 20-20-20, nice and balanced.
Classic.
Classic, versatile, good for a lot of different orchid species, and importantly, it's urea-free.
Jack's Classic check. What else?
All right, next we've got MSU Orchid Fertilizer. This one was actually developed by Michigan State University, specifically for orchids grown in, like, pure water or rainwater.
Wow, they really went all out on this one.
They did. They even have different versions depending on if you're using well water or reverse osmosis water, so
So specific.
it's very specific.
What other options do we have?
Another winner is Better Grow Orchid Plus.
Right.
Good balanced nutrient profile, plus it has those added micronutrients, so it's a great all-around choice, especially for orchids planted in bark.
Okay, so those are some good balanced ones.
Yeah.
What if we're looking for something, more for long-term care or like boosting those blooms?
Okay, so for long-term care for mature orchids, Dynagrow Orchid Pro is a great option.
Tiny grow. Okay.
It's that low nitrogen formula, so it's good for preventing too much leafy growth.
Right. All right.
And it's got a full spectrum of micronutrients for overall plant health.
Dynagrow, noted.
Mm.
And then, of course, those bloom boosters when we want that, amazing flower show.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you're looking for that extra encouragement in the flowering department, options like Miracle Grow Bloom Booster or Better Grow Orchid Bloom Booster can be really effective.
But remember, those are a special treat, not a staple.
Exactly. You still got to give them that balanced foundation.
Okay, so we covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
We did.
We busted myths, explored the types, we even got some specific products.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go too crazy and start, feeding our orchids, are there any other essential tips we need to keep in mind to make sure they're actually, truly thriving?
Great question. So there are a few key practices that go hand in hand with all this fertilization stuff to really create that ideal environment.
Okay.
So we're going to delve into those in the next part of our deep dive. So, we've been talking about the what to actually give orchids, the types of nutrients, fertilizers. Now let's get into the how, the stuff that goes along with feeding them to make sure they're really thriving.
Okay, yeah.
Because choosing the right fertilizer, that's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Exactly. So one of the most important things, and it's often overlooked, is watering.
Oh, watering.
It sounds basic, but it makes a huge difference in how they take up nutrients and just their overall health.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the connection between watering and fertilizer?
Remember how sensitive orchids are to those fertilizer salts?
Yes.
Well, if you put fertilizer on dry potting mix, those salts can concentrate around the roots.
Uh-oh.
And that can actually cause damage. It's almost like pouring straight salt on their roots.
Oh, ouch. Okay, so always water first.
Always water first, yeah. Thoroughly before you put any fertilizer on there. And that's going to help distribute everything evenly.
Okay.
And it prevents those salts from building up and burning the roots.
So it's like we're giving them a little buffer zone.
Yes, exactly.
A wall protection.
Okay, water first, fertilize second. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
What else should we know about watering?
So just as important as watering before you fertilize is flushing that potting mix regularly.
Okay.
So even diluted fertilizer, those salts can build up over time,
Oh, yeah.
and it messes with the balance of the potting mix.
Gotcha.
And you can actually get something called nutrient lockout,
Nutrient lockout.
where the orchid can't even access the nutrients even if they're in there.
It's like the soil's getting clogged up or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's getting all blocked up with salt.
So how often should we be doing that, flushing the potting mix?
A good rule of thumb is about once a month. Just flush it with plain water.
Oh.
That's going to wash away all those excess salts and keep everything nice and healthy down there.
It's like a spa day for the orchids.
It is a little spa treatment.
I love that. Okay, any other, watering tips we should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, you always want to pay attention to what type of potting mix you're using because they all hold moisture differently.
Right.
So bark, for example, tends to dry out faster than, say, sphagnum moss.
Right, yeah. Because we talked about how the mix affects our fertilizer. And it sounds like it affects our watering, too.
Absolutely.
So, how do we actually know when to water then, no matter what mix we're using?
Honestly, the finger test is still the best way.
The finger test?
Yeah, just stick your finger an inch or so into the potting mix.
Okay.
If it feels dry, it's time to water.
Okay.
If it's still moist, hold off a bit.
Easy enough. All right, so we've got our watering down. Water before we fertilize, flush it once a month, and do the finger test.
You'll got it.
What other parts of orchid care should we be thinking about?
So now that we've got like the feeding and watering down, let's talk about observation.
Observation.
Yeah, becoming a really good observer is like one of the most valuable things you can do as an orchid grower.
So we have to be orchid detectives.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What clues should we be looking for?
Your orchids are always trying to tell you something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's all about learning to read the signals, right?
Mhm.
So start by paying close attention to those leaves.
The leaves, okay, so like we talked about how the color can tell us about magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
What other secrets can we learn from the leaves?
Well, look at the texture, like how firm they are.
Okay,
Are they nice and plump, or are they starting to wrinkle? Maybe they're drooping.
okay.
That could mean they need more water, or there could even be a problem with their roots.
So it's like a window into the plant's overall health.
Exactly.
Okay, and the roots. What should we be looking out for there?
Healthy orchid roots are going to be firm and plump, kind of a light green or whitish color.
Yeah.
If you see brown, mushy, shriveled roots, that's a problem.
Okay.
Could be too much water, root rot, could even be fertilizer burn. Those roots are so important, you know.
Yeah.
They absorb all the water and nutrients.
We've got to keep an eye on those roots. What other parts of the orchid should we be checking out?
Just pay attention to how it's growing in general. Is it putting out new leaves, new roots? Are the flower spikes coming at the right time? Or does it seem like it's struggling, you know?
Okay.
Like something's off.
So just like paying attention to the whole plant, basically.
Yeah. The whole picture.
It's amazing how much we can learn just from looking, right?
It really is.
So what happens if we notice something that's like not right?
The key is don't panic.
Okay, good advice.
Just make small adjustments and see how the orchid responds. So say the leaves are a bit pale, maybe try adding a little more magnesium to your fertilizer.
Okay.
If the roots are looking mushy, maybe cut back on watering or repot it into a mix that drains better.
So it's all about being like proactive and responding to what they need.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, but even with the best care, sometimes things just go wrong, right?
Of course, yeah.
So what are some common challenges and how can we like troubleshoot them?
One of the biggest ones people have is their orchids just won't bloom.
Oh yeah, I've been there.
They can be finicky, you know, even with the right fertilizer and everything. Sometimes those flower spikes just don't come.
It's so frustrating. So what might be stopping them from blooming?
Could be a few things. One possibility is they're not getting enough light.
Light, okay.
They need bright, indirect light
Mm-hmm.
to photosynthesize and make all that energy they need to flower. If it's stuck in a dark corner, it might just be trying to survive, you know?
So the right amount of light is key.
It is.
Okay, what else?
Temperature can also be a factor.
Temperature, okay.
They generally like it between the 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit during the day.
Okay.
A little cooler at night. Big temperature swings can stress them out
Okay,
and mess with their blooming cycle.
so it's got to be just right like Goldilocks.
Yeah, exactly. Not too hot, not too cold.
Got it. Anything else?
Sometimes it's honestly just patience.
Patience.
Some orchids take years to mature
Oh, wow.
and start blooming. It really depends on the type you have.
So do your research.
Yeah, know what you're working with.
Don't give up hope. Okay, so what about pests and diseases? Are those something we need to worry about?
Definitely. Orchids can get a variety of pests.
Oh, no.
Mealybugs, aphids, spider mites.
Okay.
You got to check them regularly for any signs of infestation
Okay.
and act fast if you see anything.
And what about diseases?
Good air circulation is key for preventing those fungal diseases.
Okay.
So don't overcrowd your orchids and try not to get water on the leaves, especially at night.
So we got to be observant, troubleshoot problems, prevent pests and diseases.
It's all part of the job.
Okay. Any other insights you can give us to become like orchid masters?
Honestly, the best thing is to keep learning and keep experimenting.
Oh, okay.
The world of orchids is huge. There's so much variety, always something new to discover.
You're right. This deep dive has definitely opened my eyes. I feel like I'm moving up in the orchid world.
That's what we like to hear. And remember, every orchid is a little different. So what works for one might not work for another, right?
Right.
Don't be afraid to try different things. Adjust as you go, and most importantly, just enjoy it.
Enjoy the journey. Okay, so we've covered a ton in the second part.
Yeah.
We talked about watering and fertilizer, how they work together, being orchid detectives, and even tackled some common challenges. What final bits of wisdom can you give us to like actually put all this into practice and make our homes an orchid paradise? We've covered so much in this deep dive. It's amazing how much there is to know about orchids.
Right, and we've only just scratched the
And I
surface.
know. I already feel way more confident, but it can be a little overwhelming, honestly.
Oh, totally. It's easy to get lost in the details and feel like you need, like, a botany degree.
Yeah,
But just remember, the important thing is to start somewhere and just keep learning.
that's good advice.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the one big thing you want listeners to take away?
I'd say the most important thing is to be curious about your orchids
Curious. Okay.
and really connect with them. Don't just follow the rules blindly.
Mhm.
Try to understand why we do the things we do. Observe your plants, pay attention to what they're telling you, and don't be afraid to try different things, you know?
You're right. It's like building a relationship with them,
Exactly.
not just treating them like, decorations or something. So how can people actually put all this knowledge into practice?
Okay, so first, I want you to go back and look at your orchid care routine.
Okay.
Really look at it. How are you watering? What fertilizer are you using? What's the environment like?
Okay.
Are you actually giving them what they need, or are you accidentally stressing them out?
So it's time to put those detective skills to work.
Yes. As you're observing them, ask yourself, are the leaves nice and green? Or are they showing signs of, like, missing nutrients?
Yeah.
Are those roots healthy and plump? Or are they having a hard time?
Hmm.
Is your potting mix draining well? Is there enough air getting to the roots?
Okay, those are great questions to think about. What if we see something's not right?
Don't freak out. Orchids are tough. Just make small changes and see how they react.
Okay, good advice.
So if the leaves are pale, maybe try adding a little more magnesium.
Right.
If the roots are kind of mushy, adjust your watering. Maybe even repot it into a different mix.
So we're constantly fine-tuning based on what they're telling us.
Exactly.
What other resources are out there for people who want to learn even more?
Oh, there's so much. Local orchid societies are amazing.
Oh, yeah.
You can connect with other people, share tips, get advice.
It's always more fun to learn with others.
Right. Botanical gardens usually have great orchid collections, and they often have classes.
Oh, cool.
And of course, the internet is a goldmine.
Yeah,
Articles, forums, online communities, you name it.
that's awesome. So as we wrap up, what's the most inspiring thing you've learned from orchids?
That's a good one. I think it's how incredibly resilient and adaptable they are.
Resilient, okay.
They can survive in some of the toughest places,
Uh,
cloud forests, deserts. They've come up with all these amazing ways to get nutrients, save water, attract pollinators.
they're like little survivors.
They are. And even when things get tough, they find a way to keep going and thrive.
That's a great message. It's a reminder that we can do the same.
Totally.
So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to embrace the amazing world of orchids.
Yes.
Let their beauty inspire you, let their toughness motivate you, and let them teach you about life.
Well said.
Happy growing, everyone.